storm presses low over marsh and rice field on Pentecost Sunday, May 19, 1850, and the wind worries the gallery like a loose thought, while rain knots itself along the eaves. In the quarters, lamp smoke lifts a thin ribbon, and Isaiah Cato sets an iron key upon the pine table, cool weight, blunt shine, naming this as fiction inspired by historical realities. No claim of documentary truth, only a measured light against the wide dark. The yard bell breathes the hour. The big house corridor answers with a wood-deep murmur, and his mouth gathers the names he keeps as seed. He touches the table's scars with a work-rough thumb and feels the grain's slow music, the way slats of a crib sing when a child settles. Outside, water ticks from the wash line into the red clay, slow as a clock that has decided to be kind. In the overseer's study, a ledger waits with a cracked spine, tally marks thin as healed cuts. From here, Isaiah can almost smell the paste and ink, a sweetness that overpromises. He does not look toward the great house yet. He lets the rain speak until its insistence becomes measure. One by one, names move inward, not spoken to the room but kept like candles cupped from the wind. Dinah, Ben, Ruth of the side hall, Ezra of the boat shed, old Leah who remembers the first flood, and others who have no letters pinned to them. The bell in the square downriver sounds distant as a ship's throat, and nearer at hand, a hinge takes breath. Soft, drawn in, as if the door itself had learned courtesy. He lays the white kerchief beside the key, the cloth's faint starch answering the iron's chill, and the two together look like a choice set out for judging. Rain carries a scent of pluff mud and rice stalk. The marsh exhales what it has always known about weight and giving way. Isaiah steadies his breath, not to smother anger, but to line it up as a sawyer sets teeth before the cut. He tips the lamp's wick lower to make shadows honest, and watches the small flame accept restraint without argument. A draft licks the threshold. He sets his boot to the sill so the room can remember the shape of his standing. He knows the study's cork that cries like a trapped mouse, the gallery hinge that hesitates, the habit of laying the ledger ribbon east to west, all waiting to be what they already are. But this hour claims no tools, only temper. He folds the kerchief once and leaves it ready, a square of quiet he can carry where noise will want to be king. Let what is locked be found by its right key, he says into the wood and rain, and the iron listens, its tooth learning the table's patience. The bell takes another breath of brass and lets it go, and the night agrees to count with him rather than against. Tell softly, if the tale has reached a listening room where lamps are kind, from what place it finds welcome, and what hour the clock keeps there, that this stormed night may know its company. Night settles like damp felt over Charleston harbor, and below the seawall, lanterns throw tatters of gold across water that keeps its own counsel. Up the road, the quarters breathe through thin quilts and smoke-bit hearths by the flooded ditch, while in the overseer's study, a ledger leans toward the fire as though a book could be warmed into kindness. The air is brined with tide and wet rope. Somewhere a gull scolds the dark and is answered by a skiff's low knock against pilings. On East Bay, a tavern door yawns and releases fiddle and stomp, permission wrapped in noise, then shuts again, its latch catching like a coin bitten to test its metal. In the yard, a child shifts near the shed, and the scrap of white sewn to her sleeve stirs like a pale moth in the draft that runs between well and woodpile. The gallery keeps its latches up against eyes. Hinges guard their stinginess unless coaxed. Isaiah walks the corridor where the lamp glass blooms a small halo against plaster, the floor runner darkened by damp carried in on boots. The door to the pantry is taught to inhale rather than complain, and the one to the study holds a stiffness that feels less like strength than fear. Beyond the back step, the axe waits upright by the block, iron-shouldered with dew, not a threat, a weight a hand might borrow to steady a thought. He pauses where the gallery turns and listens to the two winters arguing. the harbor's merriment spending itself like loose change, the quarter's quiet saving breath with the care of the poor. The bell for second prayers taps the hour with modest knuckles. His palm finds the railing's salt-slick grain, and he reads it the way one reads a weathered page, not for news, for bearings. The ledger on Webb's desk would set a man's life into columns and call it order. Out here, breath ghosts, and is gone, proving the body belongs to air, not ink. Isaiah lets names warm the mouth without leaving it, Dinah, Ben, Ruth, so that when speech is needed, it will not come cold. He turns from the open stretch of harbor light to the narrow good the yard can hold and keeps moving, sparing his steps and saving the dark. Frost had not yet found the causeway when the bargain was spoken. Morning pale as milk over the rice banks, sedge crisp underfoot, mule breath threading the air. Overseer Webb, voice polished for Sabbath ears, set his words like fence posts. Dinah and the boy Ben kept safe in exchange for Isaiah's unbroken labor, and there, on the road, the hinge within him seemed to settle into alignment. Dinah's hand in his for one heartbeat, Ben's laugh like a pebble skittering along a barrel's rim, and the day held still, as if persuaded. Weeks turned, the river skinned itself with a pewter calm, and at the dock the ropes gave back a tar-sweet smell as barrels thumped and skids squealed. Factor Ellery leaned to the ledger as a man leans to a mirror and signed a name not his to wear, the flourish bright as a blade, laid flat. Dinah's sister was numbered and gone inland without a cry. Anyone with power was willing to hear. Noon's bell cut the air clean, and in that single stroke the world arranged itself to please arithmetic. A gull's wing flashed once like a signal, then folded. Isaiah stood in Webb's study, long enough to hear the scratch of nib on paper and to watch the red slash travel a woman's line as if winter itself had taken a pen. No coal, no iron, only the arithmetic of refusal, the column walking away from mercy, while the margins swallowed what they could not count. Paste and lemon oil made a sweetness that emptied the mouth. The room glowed with a false warmth that did not reach the boards. He returned to the quarters by the field road where cart ruts held yesterday's shallow water, and the ditch made a thin, talkative sound. Inside, he lifted the straw tick and slid his white kerchief under, the linen cool as a kept promise laid aside for later work. He bent to the slats as a man bends to a rail for prayer and spoke not petition, but vow, a quiet joining of breath to board that no flourish written by another hand would own his keeping. In his chest, something swung across its pin and settled on a new catch. The click, felt rather than heard, told him what had been open would not be opened again to the same word. At the door he paused with his palm flat against the jamb, aware of how thresholds hold both weather and will. Out in the lane, a boy's boot print softened under dew as if it too were being erased. A crow clacked from the field edge and startled no one. The bell down river took up its steady office, reminding each hour of itself, and Isaiah answered without sound, the answer traveling his bones like a slow current as he turned toward whatever the next weather would require. Rain practices its scales on the shed roof, a clean patter that rounds the edges of sound and leaves the air smelling of wet pine and iron. Isaiah steps onto the tamped earth where many winters have taught feet to stand square. His hand finds the haft not for bite, but for balance, the grain laying itself along his palm as if remembering him. The axe wears a shallow bruise in the wood, not disfigurement, but history, and when he lifts it a finger's breadth, the weight answers with a small assent that speaks of steady work, not display. He lets the iron down again without courting the block, and listens, not with ear alone, but with wrists and shoulders, where a tool's truth travels. Beyond, the yard keeps its fog, and somewhere a mule shakes itself free of beads that the rain has stitched along its back. The bell's half-hour reaches thin through the damp, a measured breath rather than a summons. Tonight, the axe's task is to teach patience, to mark a cadence a man can move by when the house tries to hurry him. He looks where rooms meet their manners. In Webb's study, the decanter waits with its cork that squeaks like a frightened thing when turned without care. Along the gallery, one hinge asks for a half-turn of kindness so it can stop complaining. On the desk, the ribbon of the ledger is always laid east to west, as if the sun could be made to obey a thumb. He names each not as instructions, but as weather signs, cloud shapes to be remembered and read when the sky goes heavy. From a tallow cup he warms between fingers, he takes a dab and smooths it into the shed door's stubborn place until the hinge learns to swallow its own breath. The rag he uses is cut from a worn shirt hem. Its threads hush the half's bruise as if soothing a child in fever. The iron key in his pocket rests cool and sure, not rival to the axe, but answer to a different question. Passage, not force. When the bell's next sliver of tone slides in from the river, the shed holds his rhythm as a drum keeps a dancer honest. He leaves the axe upright, its edge faced away from quarrel, and draws the door to with a touch that makes wood and metal meet like kin who have learned better manners. Rain has slackened to a gauze over Goose Creek, and the big house holds a varnished stillness that makes its own climate. Isaiah stands where the corridor elbows toward the front and lets the rooms speak their master's grammar so he can learn the sentences they will try to make of him. The bell from town looses a single note into the softened air, neither summons nor mercy, only measure. Overseer Webb keeps faith with paper. His study is a fortress of columns and polish, ledgers stacked like ramparts that mistake order for justice. Yet a blot near the inkwell betrays his hand's tremor, and a drawer that never sits flush shows where he hides what cannot be accounted, a map that will return him to this very desk when numbers lean back and weigh him. His cabinet hinge whispers in every small draft, promising to speak louder when the hour leans. Deputy Marris bends his spine to clocks. The front corridor holds his hat and his damp coat, the brass timepiece above the door rubbed bright, as if brass alone could keep men straight. At noon, he nods to the courthouse dial as if it were scripture, and each quarter hour is a tether he thinks he grips, not knowing the bell can slip its leash and unmake his stride upon this very threshold. The latch there swells in rain and hesitates, a pause that can be taught to widen. Factor Ellery eats at the head of any table laid before him. The dining hall answers his hunger with shine and hush, bread placed where his hand expects dominion to begin. He believes a seating chart fixes fate, but the line from pitcher to plate is a compass that can be redrawn by angle alone. The door to that room opens like a fan to the county's appetite. Its hinge has learned to behave, and for that very reason, it can be asked to delay. Preacher Vale owns the stair by habit. His boots have taught the risers to groan his name, and the landing crooks, like a pulpit, turn when he lifts his hand. He trusts the bell to seal his sentences, unaware that a missed chime can hollow a speech and leave a man talking to timber. Tallow and wet wool scent that back passage. Every tread remembers, though memory is not the same as consent. Isaiah turns the iron key in his pocket, a cool star, and lets these 4 lessons settle where plans keep warm. The house resumes its careful breath, and the rain moves on. Clouds ride low over the rice banks, and the night leans toward its hinge. Quarter hour before midnight, the harbor bell climbing in patient iron to speak the 12th. Isaiah stands between magnolia and well where the yard holds a darker dark, breath whitening a little at the edge, and lets the ground take his weight as a ledger takes ink. The air smells of wet rope and bruised leaves. A frog ticks from the ditch like a small metronome nobody taught. He begins with the living because the living must be carried first. Dinah, Ben, Ruth of the side hall, old Leah with her flood lore, Jacob who mends shoes when the overseer looks away, Annette who hums gospel into starch. Each name is a rung that steadies the climb, not a drum to beat. then those whose names have been worked thin by distance. Sari sent inland without farewell, Jonas of the next place whose laugh fell quiet, a sister with the kind hands he never learned to scold. He does not know who hears him, he knows only that the naming makes a stair where there was none. The axe remains in the shed like a witness at meeting, present and silent, its edge turned toward patience. Isaiah carries instead the iron key and a ribbon taken from the ledger's mouth, silk abraded by years of closing. He has bound a small parcel with that strip, letting the desk's old authority hold a different duty. At his wrist, the white kerchief knots to remind the hand of its office, not to tremble, not to boast. Along the gallery, boards answer a careful foot with the kind of memory that keeps its secrets. He moves as if reading a page that tears when rushed, fingertips learning the painted rail's chill and the places where paint is thin as old milk. Doors drowse on their latches. One exhales at his passing, the oil he worked into the hinge, translating last night's kindness into this hour's path. Between floorboards, a draft creeps like a letter slipped under, and he steps over it so the letter can travel where it needs to go. In the pantry's margin, he pauses long enough to wrap the parcel tighter with the ledger ribbon, then nests it under the folded white cloth so that ordinary sight will see only a servant's neatness. The decanter elsewhere has learned its new sermon, the glass lip will not gossip. He marks the interval by breath instead of counting, because numbers turn public when said aloud, and nothing of this must belong to the corridor's echo. The harbor bell gives its next fraction, iron shy of completion. Isaiah returns to the yard for one more litany, fields, road, docks, study, spaces spoken as if they were kin whose thresholds must be greeted before entering. Let doors learn welcome and bells learn truth, he says in the cup of his mouth, no louder than a sleeper's sigh, and the night keeps it. He sets off along the spine of the house, ribs of light under doors showing where warmth is hoarded, and lets the greased hinge on the side window prove its new manners with a breath of permission. Rain leans against the study sash with a steady palm, and the lamp draws a quiet circle on walnut where arithmetic rehearses its virtue. Isaiah slips through the loosened side window, glazing kissed by damp, latch gentled to courtesy the night before, and lands on braided rug without a word from the floor. Ink, lemon oil, a coal's ghost in the grate, the room smells like a man's idea of control. He approaches the ledger as if it could wake, hand under hand, until its weight lies across his fingers like a sleeping child's trust. The page with the red gash waits, a winter slash through a name. He folds the leaf so the wound hides under the book's own flesh, not gone, but quieted. Columns lift their chins as soldiers do. In the margin, a thready silence thickens where arithmetic pretends not to hear itself. The decanter sits with its twin cups like a small altar to habit. He turns the cork slow. The planted cry is there. Mouse squeak, startle softened by cloth, and the amber within leans toward the lamp as if warmth were promise. He pours a temperate line of what the eye calls comfort into the throat and sets the white napkin beneath the tray, not as finery, but as bearing, a cradle for what will move. The ribbon taken from this very book binds a tiny packet that rests in his pocket for a different road. Keys jingle at the door, their talk like small coins unsettled. Overseer Webb comes in with weather on his shoulders and a certainty rehearsed on his tongue. He sets his ring of keys in the dish, as always, and blesses the ledger with a flat palm as if to coax it to purr. He does not notice the window's courtesy or the page's new fold. Habit teaches eyes what to miss. He pours, drinks, and softens by degrees he would deny if named. Isaiah steps back into the corridor's Vale, wood smelling of beeswax and damp wool, and lets the iron key in his pocket ride cool against his thigh. Entry, not argument. He draws the sash down on a tide of breath timed between Webb's sips. The window meets its frame without complaint, a learned quiet. The room resumes its posture as if it had never moved at all. Rain glosses the outside sill. His cloth takes the thin shine and leaves it looking like ordinary wet. Behind him, the study returns to its old story: order, polish, and the arithmetic that thinks it can keep a man. The corridor receives him and closes its mouth over the sound of his steps, storing them the way a tree stores rings. The side hall keeps a cooler weather than the front, stone flags breathing night up through soles while the kitchen throws a warm, salted gust through its cracked door. A service bell taps, a modest summons, metal on metal, a thread drawn taut, and the latch beside it waits with iron's patient face. Ruth stands small with a tray, riding her forearms, elbows tight to her ribs, the way a child learns when spill means switch. Isaiah steps from the wainscot seam, the white kerchief at his wrist, no longer servant's sign, but a hush laid over haste. "Let the door mind kindness," he whispers toward the jamb, and makes himself the lesser so Ruth may pass first, etiquette reversed, human first. The hinge, newly taught, trades complaint for breath. The door opens in a manner that offers rather than denies. Two trays sit ready on the sideboard, their paths already chosen by habit. With fingers that read grain as letters, he slides the ribbon-bound packet from one plate's shadow to the neighbor whose circuit will carry it to a different mouth. Payoff B. The ledger's own strip binds the parcel like a tamed snake, its old authority yoked to a new duty and quiet as a folded prayer beneath the napkin's neat square. Footsteps rasp nearer, leather brisk, temper in the stride. Ruth keeps her eyes where balance lives, on the rim of a cup, on the way soup's skin thinks about running. Her small jaw sets. Isaiah lets his gaze fall to tile as if counting flaws, then lifts the tray's edge with the napkin's corner so steam purls into the cloth, leaving no scent but broth and time. The latch gives and takes in clean exchange, and the corridor's breath smooths over their passing. Outside the kitchen door, the yard's damp holds their prints, not as accusation, but as record. Two careful ovals, paired like measured notes. The bell rings again, thinner this time, as if the metal had spent something of itself to be heard. Ruth moves on, shoulders squared inside her small frame, a pilgrim with dishes for relics. Isaiah steps back into the side hall's thinner light and lets the hush close like a book over a read page. The door resumes its plain face as soon as they are through, its wood learning how to be threshold and not wall. Steam breathes along the ceiling and disappears into the beam, a small weather no one names. In the quiet left behind, the white kerchief settles against his skin as covenant, and the corridor keeps the secret as only timber can. Dawn has not yet found its edge. The back passage holds a pale damp, as if the night were wringing itself out along the sash. Preacher Vale mounts the servant's stair in his Sunday boots, leather giving a stiff amen at each lift, voice already testing phrases meant to bend backs toward obedience. The landing keeps a shallow gloss from wax and breath, a thin crescent of light pooling on the rail, like a quiet eye. Isaiah waits 2 turns below, where the corridor narrows and sound goes thin. Yesterday, the paper-fine grit in his palm taught one tread a gentler tongue. The grain, coaxed smooth, now receives weight the way a cupped hand receives water, without noise, without waste. Above, the bell troubles its own throat and misses its mark, a chime slipping between minutes as if time itself had been asked to hesitate. Vale plants his heel to summon the stair's old groan that used to shape his sermon, and the timber gives him none. His second step slides the smallest measure, no terror, a correction, and breath grabs at the edge of his prepared sentence before letting it go unblessed. The scripture he keeps for others thins like steam in cold air. Leather creaks a confession no congregation will hear. Below, a door trained to deny has learned better manners. When the iron key finds the ward, there is consent instead of contest. The latch settles back without a cluck, wood and metal agreeing on a single shared breath. Isaiah crosses a threshold that once made itself a law, and now remembers it is merely hinge and plank. The white band at his wrist drinks a bead of mist fallen from the lifted sash, a small anointing the house does not register. On the landing, Vale steadies his hand on the banister, fingers finding wax where he expected splinters, and looks for the bell to save his cadence. The delayed stroke arrives late and thin, not fit to seal a sentence. He clears his throat and descends one grace smaller than he intended. The stair holds his weight without praise or pain, having been taught to listen rather than answer. Isaiah eases the door to with a quiet that leaves no seam, storing the silence for rooms that will spend it soon. The passage resumes its pale breath, the sash stitching back the damp with a soft, unboastful sound. He moves toward the brighter hall, where plates will gleam and maps of seating pretend to be fate. Late morning loosens the storm's grip. Light climbs the live oaks and lays a pallid sheen across the gallery before slipping into the dining hall. Inside, the long table is drawn like a map, cloth taut, knives squared to imagine meridians, glasses ranked to catch a practiced sun. The door from the corridor opens without protest, hinge breathing once as if to clear its own throat, and the room receives the county's appetite. Factor Ellery arrives with rain-salt-crusted feint at the boot seam and the confidence of a man who sits where bread becomes verdict. He takes the head without glance or permission, napkin laid with the care of a flag unfolded in calm weather. Around him gather Overseer Webb, taught by numbers, and Deputy Marris, ribs caged to the courthouse dial, with lesser men aligning their want to the bright length of cloth. Conversation is a rustle disguised as civility. Even laughter keeps score. On the sideboard, the ledgers have been brought like loyal dogs, an unnecessary presence insisted upon. Their leather backs hold dust fine as flour from the morning sweep, and their ribbons lie down as if tired of pointing east or west. The decanter that learned a new sermon in the study stands mild and amber. 2 cups wait with a patience that pretends purity. Across the hall, the square bell speaks quarter to noon in a bright, thin measure, a reminder drawn through wood and glass. Harboring the shadow of the corridor, Isaiah reads the room's compass rather than its shine. The seating is a geometry of habit, but the line from pitcher to plate can redraw a continent. A tilt changes a reach, a delay alters a claim. The door's good manners, won by oil and time, become a lever for the flow of service, granting him seconds to place and withhold without notice. The steward pours. The amber behaves, holding the lamp inside itself as if hospitality were its own weather. Ellery nods approval at the decanter's obedience and raises his glass. Webb's thumb perches high on the stem, a tremor feathering his control. Marris watches the rim as if a court bell might chime from it. Bread is lifted with the dignity of right. Salt is passed along a prescribed wind. Isaiah marks what he needs with a mover's eye, how plates travel outward with deference that can be bent into a new current, how the head of the table is only ashore if the river agrees. The ledgers on the sideboard do not turn their heads, yet the dust writes its own soft arithmetic across their covers, a deposition no man at table will hear. The white kerchief at his wrist, quieted to skin, becomes a switch of signal to the youngest runner. 2 plates cross paths under its pale weather, and no one at the head feels the trade. When the bell clears its throat for the last quarter, the room gathers as a field does before a wind lays it one direction. The decanter tilts again, untroubled, chairs adjust by inches. A servant laughs too softly to be punished. Isaiah lets the hinge release a breath of time for one more angle, one more measured detour, not spectacle, only a new route written between door and chair. He turns from the threshold with the knowledge set like a bead on a string, placement, angle, witness, and the corridor accepts him back, already stitching itself toward quieter rites. The pantry keeps a cave-cool hush while late morning brightens the far windows. The smell is lime-washed wood, damp crock, a thread of soap. Isaiah sets a small cup beside the sink, porcelain thinned by years of lips, and tips the pitcher until water slips in a clear ribbon that makes no show of itself. The sound is modest, glass answering clay, and in that modesty his chest loosens by a notch he hadn't known was tight. He lays the white cloth flat on the board and irons its corners with the heel of his hand, not for finery, for bearing. The iron key comes out of his pocket and lies along the fold, tooth aligned to weave, authority set down so choice can stand on its own legs. Names rise like steam he does not blow away. Dinah, Ben, Ruth, kept in the mouth to warm the next needed word. Somewhere, a laugh from the dining hall falls into plates. The bell at the river landing sends a low clang up the beams. Not sentence, reminder. He wets 2 fingers and touches them to his. Temples as a man, cooled by spring water after heat, then to the hinge of his jaw where plans keep their grip. Metal and bone agree to ease. The ledger's arithmetic, chattering beyond these walls, cannot find him here. This room speaks the grammar of cups and cloth, of hands that learn to be exact and gentle in the same motion. He writes the pitcher and places it opposite an empty plate, a quiet symmetry that answers all the amber elsewhere without naming it. The key, cool witness, rests, and doorways nearby remember to receive rather than resist. He folds the cloth once, then once more, making a cradle for what carries no name and needs none. When he lifts the cup and drinks, the water goes down and leaves order rather than zeal. The taste is slate and rain, home to any mouth. He returns the cup with a sound small as a button, set in a drawer, and takes up the key again, not to brandish, to keep. The pantry absorbs his leaving without echo, as if the walls had been taught to hold a confidence and mean it. Sun climbs to its nail in the sky and holds there. Noon burnishes the courthouse brick until mortar lines show like scars. The square gathers breath and releases it in little bursts, hushed remark, shoe scrape, chain lick, while doors on either side open and shut with the avid neatness of mouths trained for spectacle. Heat settles on Isaiah's shoulders as if pressed there by a practiced hand, but his gaze stays level, not to defy, to refuse the script offered by faces that want to be told what they already believe. Inside, the corridor holds varnish, dust, and the old sweat of verdict. Benches shine with the weight of many willing silences. A clerk, voice tuned to carry but not care, breaks his name into measured syllables as if the shape of a man could be managed by pacing. Isaiah allows the sound to reach him and pass through, fiction inspired by historical realities. No claim of documentary truth, his ledger not the book on the table, but the one carried in bone and breath, where consequence is counted without sale. Webb sits further back than pride prefers, collar straight, eyes rimmed by a night that failed to steady him. Marris places his faith in the courthouse dial, counting under his tongue as though time might vote. Ellery, at ease in a borrowed dignity, studies his nails. Vale composes an expression fitted for pity he does not intend to spend. Judge and rail and flag arrange themselves as if order were a posture. The gavel's head rests like a small god asleep. The bell in the cupola lifts its bronze and lets a single stroke fall clean, dividing shade from shine with an edge of sound no blade could match. In the narrow instant after, when flies hang still and even paper seems to listen, Isaiah finds the transom's shard of blue where day saves a piece of itself from heat. He thinks of a door that learned to receive, of a hinge that unlearned its bite, of an iron key set down to let choice stand without escort. He thinks of white cloth not as servitude, but as calm. Outside, the crowd remakes its certainty with each new breath, a quilt of gazes stitched from habit more than hunger. A white parasol tilts to shield a mouth, making sentences it does not own. A boy at the rope leans forward until a hand hauls him back without malice, eyes catching the glitter of badges and the swing of keys as if learning the alphabet of power. Noon's heat lays a clear hand on every back, and the day refuses to move until its mark is made. Chains give their tidy language, and Isaiah turns because the room requires turning, not because it deserves his face. He lets the watchers have what they came for, a body in a frame, and gives them nothing of the inside that keeps measure without their leave. When the deputy guides him toward the door, the hinge, taught to courtesy, opens without sting, and the air beyond smells less of law and more of sun on wood. Late light lays a thin gilt across the gallows yard without warming it, and dust turns slow in the stillness between fence and scaffold, like flour in a held breath. The boards underfoot give back the day they have stored, boot tread, drag step, the scuff of duty rehearsed too often, and the rope throws a pale loop of shadow on plank that looks like a question no one plans to answer. Beyond the rail, hats make their own weather, some shoulders square for witness, some tilt away, as if the sun itself were blame. Isaiah stands inside that geometry where angles pretend to be law. The air tastes of dry hemp and sun-cooked pitch. The crossbeam's grain holds old storms in its rings, a history not lectured, but present. A deputy's hands, practiced but not proud, worry at a knot that resists their story. The murmur that passes outward is not hunger, not mercy, only the town admitting it cannot bear silence and will dress it with noise. From his pocket he lifts the white kerchief, once a servant's answer for crumbs and spills, and opens it with measured fingers until it is a small square of whether he can govern. The cloth rises to his throat like cool water cupped at a spring, then returns to his wrist, where he knots it without haste. Whiteness here is not surrender, it is calm taken back from another man's table. Light slides across the weave and leaves nothing but a steadiness the eye cannot spend. He thinks of a corridor where a door learned to receive, of a hinge that drank oil and forgot its bite, of an iron key set down so the choice could stand by itself. He thinks of ledgers that lay quiet on a sideboard while dust wrote a kinder sum across their backs. The axe, which has lived at the shed with its edge faced toward use, is far from this place, and remains what it has been all along in his hands, a weight that teaches a wrist to consider before it lifts. The bell that ruled noon has gone to ground. Somewhere a fly works its small errand along the beam, and neither hurries nor prays. Names come without parade and settle, where breath can keep them. Dinah, Ben, Ruth, Sari, Leah, and others the town has not learned to call correctly. They do not ask rescue, they ask to be kept. The fence takes a child's stare and sends it back gentle. A woman's sleeve of starched white gathers her elbow and does not know what it signifies. Heat loosens and shadow begins to learn the yard again. Let this cloth witness, he says, where only the wood can hear, and the knot at his wrist holds as if it had decided to do so days ago. The ledgers in the courthouse will not clap shut of their own accord, but dust is faithful and will continue its patient writing when men forget what was tallied. That arithmetic needs no ink. The gate swings once on its iron, a low animal sound that does not threaten, then comes to rest as if conscience had put its hand there. When light unhooks from the beam at last, it leaves neither blessing nor curse, only a pale absence that fools the eye into thinking peace is the same as quiet. Isaiah keeps his face turned to what remains, not in refusal, in regard. At the rail, hands that had come to be certain of something find themselves empty of certainty and busy with hats and parasols. The yard remembers how to be only boards, posts, earth. First gray lifts along the quarters as if a careful hand were raising the lid on day. The cook fire takes the match with a soft consent, and smoke threads itself into the rafters with the smell of damp wood and last night's ash. The yard is rinsed of spectacle. Cart prints puddle in shallow mirrors, and the road beyond the live oaks holds a faint shine where dew has braided itself with sand. A tin triangle waits by the door, its tongue tied back with string, ready to speak when learning needs a bell and not a drum. Elders call children to the bench where sunlight will soon lay a gold plank across knees. Beans drop into a cracked bowl, one at a time, soft knocks that count without commanding, then are poured back, the lesson traveling both directions so no number thinks itself a master. A ledger too tired for accounting opens to its blankest leaves. A charcoal nub writes names into those pale fields, not as inventory, as planting. Dinah, Ben, Ruth, Sari, Leah, letters sewn at finger pace until the page grows a small grove of belonging. A strip of white, cut from a retired kerchief, becomes a practice cloth. Small hands wet 2 fingers and trace the river's name along the weave where no ink will stain, and yet the motion will remain in their wrists. Doors along the gallery swing with new manners learned in rain, not tight with suspicion, but firm in care. The hinges keep their quiet without pride. The axe stands in the shed with its edge turned inward, a pledge to build stalls, mend rails, shape posts. True, children are taught to greet it like a neighbor and to leave it be until work calls its proper name. By the hearth, a dish of clay warms at the lip of coals. The iron key is pressed into that softened earth. Tooth first, so its shape can be fired into a small sign to live on the mantel, a mark not of access hoarded, but of openings taught and remembered. On the road, news walks, a washerwoman with pins in her mouth, a boat boy salted by the wharf, a peddler whose cartwheels learn every rut. Each carries a version of yesterday that has been told just enough to be held without breaking. Fields receive the hoe and give back the smell of turned loam, and the study window across the yard reflects only sky now, the tallies within dim to quiet furniture. A primer is mended with ribbon once tasked to close a ledger. It holds the spine of a different book, one that counts the living by the psalm of breath and task. Names are folded into song without chorus, hummed over laundry, tapped into tabletops as fingers rest between stitches, spoken to the well as buckets rise. When the triangle's knot is slipped and its tongue kisses iron, the sound is slim and clean, drawing children from doorways like a narrow path through grass. They bring beans in their fists and white scraps for practice, and sit with backs straight, not from fear, from expectation. An elder lifts her face to the new light and says, "What must be said for this to remain true?" Fiction inspired by historical realities. No claim of documentary truth. Yet truth enough in the vows we keep moving, mouth to mouth. If this telling has found a seat at any table, let there be subscribing, liking, and plain words laid in comment to carry these names along the roads we cannot all walk. Lesson: tended with care, even the smallest hinge can turn a house toward the living.